The second cup was still there when I went to check on the fire. That was what I told myself, walking out of the tent at first light on the second morning, Rex pressing warm against my left knee, the cold coming off the ridge in slow waves that smelled like wet fur and something older underneath. I told myself I was checking the fire. I had done it every morning for 3 years in the field, that first walk out before coffee, and I did not stop to think about why I always set 2 cups on the flat rock at the fire's edge the night before. I just did it, the way a man sets a plate for a person who will not be coming to supper, because the alternative is worse. The cup was gone from the rock. Not fallen, not knocked. Gone and sitting upright on the broad stump at the tree line, 6 feet back from where I had left it, with a smooth river stone settled inside it like someone had placed it there deliberately and walked away. I want to be clear about who I am before I tell you the rest of this. I am a licensed wilderness therapist. I have a prior credential as a backcountry ranger. I have spent the better part of 22 years in country that will kill you if you stop paying attention to it. I am not someone who invents things in the dark, and I am not someone who reaches for the comforting story when the uncomfortable one fits the evidence better. If you are listening to me right now, I want you to know that I measured the distance between that rock and that stump with my boot. I did it twice. 6 feet, the cup upright. The stone inside it, smooth and rounded the way river stones get, not the kind of rough-edged gravel that sits on the forest floor up here. I have been looking for a word for what I felt standing there that morning. I have not found one yet. To understand what that cup meant, I need to go back to the week before and further back than that. I came to the Cascade foothills in the fall of the year I turned 44, which was 3 years after Carl Mika died on a slope in the southern Cascades, which was 2 years after I left the Ranger Service, for reasons I have never explained completely to anyone, and which was 1 year after I passed my licensure exam on the second attempt and started taking clients into the backcountry instead of taking tourists. The difference, if you are wondering, is that the clients come out different. That was the theory. That was what I had read and studied and what my supervisor at the practicum had told me with a confidence I mostly believed. Carl and I had worked the backcountry together for 8 field seasons. He was 51 when a cornice gave out on a February reconnaissance and he went down a 700-foot drainage. They recovered him 4 days later. I had been the one to call it off the night before, citing weather, citing what felt like an excess of risk that I could not quite put numbers to. I have thought about that decision approximately every day since. The thought does not go anywhere. It just sits there like an unfinished problem on a workbench, waiting for a tool I have not acquired. After Carl, I started setting 2 cups of camp coffee every evening. One for me, one on the flat rock, the one he always claimed first at any fire we shared, because he said flat rocks held the heat and kept the coffee warm longer. I do not know if that is true. It sounds like something Carl would say and then refuse to reconsider, even if you proved him wrong. I never tried. I just started setting 2 cups, one on the flat rock and one in my hands, and I did not explain it to anyone, and I did not plan to. When I came out to the base camp in October with Dylan and Rex, the ritual came with me. Dylan was 15 years old, referred to my program by a court-affiliated counselor after 11 weeks of voluntary silence at home, at school, and in the clinical office where 3 separate therapists had attempted to reach him. Voluntary is the clinical word. It means he chose it, or something in him chose it, which is not the same as choosing it the way you choose a jacket. The case notes I read before intake described a boy whose father had left the family 9 months prior, without warning or stated reason, and who had stopped speaking approximately 3 weeks after. The notes were careful and detailed and told me almost nothing about who Dylan actually was. What I knew from intake was that he was 15, that he was quiet in a way that had weight to it rather than emptiness, and that he had agreed to the 4-day backcountry session without any verbal indication of whether he wanted to or not. He signed the release forms. He packed his own gear. The list I had sent his mother checked off completely. Every item present. When I pulled up to the trailhead in the truck with Rex in the back seat, Dylan was already standing there with his pack on, looking at the tree line. Rex climbed out and went directly to him, pressed his nose against the boy's knee. Dylan reached down without looking and put one hand on Rex's head for a moment, then straightened up and looked at the trail. That was the beginning of what I can tell you. Rex is a yellow shepherd mix, 9 years old, grey around his muzzle and moving slower in the mornings than he used to, but still a working dog in the ways that matter. Carl had given him to me as a pup, actually, which is the kind of detail I try not to lean on too hard because it makes the whole thing sound arranged. It was not arranged. Rex was a dog from a litter Carl's neighbour had been looking to place, and Carl had handed him to me in a canvas bag on a trailhead in September, a decade ago now, saying I needed something to make me go home at the end of a shift. He was not entirely wrong. Rex had been in the backcountry with me every session I had run since I started the practice. He was not a certified therapy animal in any formal sense. He was my dog, and clients responded to him, and I had never once seen him spook in any way that I could not account for. He did not bark at deer. He did not chase porcupines. He had walked calmly past a black bear at 40 feet the previous spring, without more than a low, orienting movement of his ears. He was, in every practical sense, the most reasonable creature I had ever worked alongside. The trail into the base camp was 4 miles of moderate elevation gain, nothing technical, through second-growth Douglas fir, giving way to a fringe of old-growth hemlock on the upper bench, where I kept the established site. I had run 15 sessions out of that camp over 2 seasons. I knew the trail the way you know, a hallway in a house you have lived in for years. I knew where the drainage crossed at the switchback, where the exposed root system made for bad footing in the wet, where the old snag leaned into the trail and dropped branches in wind. Dylan walked behind me the whole way in, not lagging, not rushing, keeping a pace that matched mine without me asking him to. Rex moved between us, which he did not usually do. He typically stayed within a few feet of my heel. That day he drifted back, checked on the boy, came forward, went back again, like he was measuring something. We reached the campsite in the early afternoon. I set up the tents while Dylan assembled the fire ring stones I had asked him to carry, doing it without instruction or question. He placed the stones in a careful circle, the kind of attention you give to a thing when you are trying to make it exactly right. And when he was finished, he sat back on his heels and looked at the fire ring for a moment before he stood up. I put a hand on one of the stones, felt the rough surface. "Good work," I said. He did not respond, but he did not move away. We made camp in the early October cold, which in the Cascades at 3,000 feet means a sky that went from pale grey to a hard, clear blue, to a deep charcoal in the space of 2 hours, and a temperature that dropped 12 degrees in the hour after sunset. The old-growth hemlock along the northern edge of the camp stood against that darkening sky in a way that I had always liked. The kind of still that is not emptiness but presence, something old and patient in the posture of old timber. I started the fire after dark and set the tin cups out, mine in my hands, Carl's on the flat boulder at the fire's edge. I did not think about whether Dylan noticed. He was across the fire from me, his own tin cup of instant coffee in both hands, looking at the flames, and I was absorbed in the ordinary work of feeding the fire and thinking about the session plan for the morning, and not thinking about Carl, which is what I called thinking about Carl when I was trying not to. I want to be honest. I did not expect the cup to register. I had set it out in front of a previous client who had never asked about it. I had set it out for Rex, essentially, for 3 years in country where there was no one watching who would wonder. It was a private thing, not performative, not meant to be interpreted. I set it out the way a man sets a clock before he goes to sleep, because the motion is part of how he gets there. What I did not expect was for anyone to move it that night. The first night, I lay in my tent, listening to the routine sounds of the camp settling in the dark. An owl, 3 calls, and then nothing. The fire diminishing to a low sound of ticking wood. Rex at my feet, his breathing the slow, regular rhythm of a dog who is genuinely asleep. And then, sometime after midnight, I heard Rex stand. Not in alarm. He did not growl. He did not wake me with a sound. He simply stood, which I registered because I know the particular motion of that dog in the dark the way you know the breathing of anyone you have slept near for a decade. He stood and I lay still and listened, and for 30 or 40 seconds there was nothing, and then he lay back down and was asleep inside of a minute. I did not get up. I told myself it was a deer at the perimeter, which was the rational answer, and it probably was. I woke at first light and walked out to check the fire. The flat boulder was empty. The cup was on the stump. I stood there for a while. The fire was cold ash, the way it gets when it has been out for 4 or 5 hours, and the morning was absolutely still. That particular quality of stillness before the birds start that makes the Cascades feel like a room you have walked into just after someone left it. The cup sat on the stump, 6 feet from the boulder, upright. The stone inside it was grey and smooth, the size of a man's palm if the man had smaller hands than mine, rounded on every edge, the kind of river stone that takes a long time to get that way. I tried rain first. There had been no rain, and I knew it, but I tried it anyway. A gust of wind moving the cup from the rock to the stump without tipping it or breaking the rock. The cup had been set on was not a thing I could get the physics to support. I tried an animal, something curious, a pack rat or a marten, and I gave that a genuine 30 seconds of thought before I recognized that the cup was upright, that the stone had been placed inside it rather than fallen from anywhere, and that no pack rat had ever, in my experience, moved something 6 feet and then arranged a river stone inside it for reasons. I tried myself, asleep, getting up and doing it in the dark, and that was the most uncomfortable explanation because it was at least metabolically possible. And I stood with it for a full minute before I dismissed it on the grounds that I have never walked in my sleep, that Rex would have followed me, and that I did not know where a river stone of that quality had come from on a dry ridge, 2 miles from the nearest drainage. 3 explanations, 3 failures. The cup sat on the stump in the morning light, and I did not touch it. I do not know exactly when I became aware that I was not alone in the clearing. Not Dylan, not yet, something else. The feeling was not fear. That is important to say because I have been in country where fear was the correct response, and I know what it feels like in the chest and the legs and the particular attention of the eyes. This was not that. It was closer to the feeling of being watched by something that is not looking at you the way a predator looks, something observing rather than measuring. It came from the northern tree line, from the old-growth hemlock, and it was gone by the time I turned to look directly at it, the way peripheral awareness sometimes tells you something that a straight-on look cannot confirm. Rex came out of the tent behind me, padded to my side, looked at the tree line, and sat down. I looked at him. He looked at the tree line. His ears were forward but soft. The position he took with things that interested him, rather than things that concerned him. "All right," I said quietly, and I do not know if I was talking to him or to whatever he was looking at. Probably both. I was sitting by the rebuilt fire with the second cup of coffee in my hands, the stone still in Carl's cup on the stump, when Dylan came out of his tent. He had his sleeping bag around his shoulders and his wool cap pulled down, and he stopped outside his tent and looked at the stump and then at me. His face did not change expression. He did not point or speak. He looked at the stump, and then he looked at me with an expression I recognized but had not expected to see on a 15-year-old face. It was the expression of someone who has seen something they do not yet have a category for, and who is holding very still in the presence of it. I poured him a cup of coffee and handed it across the fire without speaking. He took it. That was the second morning's beginning. We spent most of it doing the session work I had planned, which at this stage of a wilderness program is mostly task-based. Camp maintenance, fire preparation, identifying the wood that burns well and the wood that doesn't, the kind of real-world competence work that bypasses the self-consciousness that talking requires. Dylan moved through every task efficiently, attentively, without being asked twice, which told me things about him that 11 weeks of case notes had not. He was a boy who wanted to be good at things. He wanted to do the task correctly, and when he did, you could see a brief, controlled satisfaction in his posture before he moved on to the next thing. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter of the camp on the pretext of checking the bear hang, and I looked at the ground around the stump. There were no boot prints I did not recognize. The soil at the base of the stump was damp from the overnight cold, and it held impressions the way damp soil does, and there were tracks there that I crouched down and studied for a while without straightening up. Large, very large. The kind of large that makes you do the arithmetic of what animal could produce it, and the arithmetic does not come out to anything comfortable. The stride was not a bear's stride. The weight distribution was not a bear's distribution. The impression was deeper at the ball and the toes than at the heel in a way that suggested something moving on a different kind of foot. I thought about Dylan at the stump that morning, the expression on his face. I thought about Rex in the night, standing and then settling. I filled in the tracks with my boot toe methodically, pressing the soil flat. I do not know exactly why I did that. Something about not wanting the evidence to become the subject. The afternoon session ran long. We built a simple shelter from a tarp and parachute cord, Dylan working one side of it while I worked the other, the two of us communicating through gesture and positioning in the way that shared physical work allows, which is one of the reasons I have always believed in the model. You do not need language to collaborate. Language is actually sometimes the thing that gets in the way. By dusk, the shelter was solid. A low wind had come up from the west, moving the canopy of the old hemlock, and the light in the camp had gone amber, and then copper, and then a deep, soft, grey blue. I started the fire. Dylan sat on the log we had dragged for a bench, Rex between his feet, and watched me build it up from tinder and kindling to a sustainable burn, something I have done hundreds of times, but still take some care with, because a fire started right is a different thing from a fire started adequate. And if you are listening to this story, I want to ask you something before I go any further, because what happened at the tree line as the light went down is not the kind of thing I can describe in a quick sentence and have it land the way it actually landed for me. If you are still here and you have a moment that you have never fully told anyone about, something that did not fit and that you have mostly kept to yourself, I think you will know when we get there what I mean. If this story is sitting with you, stay with it. The light was almost gone when I saw the shape at the northern tree line. I want to be precise, and I want to be honest about the limits of my precision. It was a shape at the edge of the hemlock, in the gap between two large trunks where the last of the western light still came through at an angle. The shape was large, very large. I have been around large animals in the backcountry for more than 2 decades, and my eye for scale at distance is calibrated in a way that I trust. And what I saw at the tree line was at least 8 feet in height, possibly more, with a width at the shoulder that I cannot square with any animal I have a category for. It was dark in colour. It stood in a posture of absolute stillness, not the stillness of something frozen in alarm, but the stillness of something that is choosing to be visible because it wants to be seen. I did not move. I was aware of my hands on my knees, of the fire at my back putting warmth across my shoulders. I was aware of Rex, who had lifted his head from between Dylan's feet and was looking at the tree line with the same soft forward ear position from the morning. No alarm, no flinch. The shape remained for what I estimate was 90 seconds, though time does not work the way a clock says it does in moments like that. Then, without sound, without any visible transition of movement that I could track with my eyes, it was not there anymore. The gap between the hemlock trunks was just the gap between the hemlock trunks again, the last of the western light coming through it in a low amber line. I sat with that for a moment. The fire crackled. Rex put his head back down. Dylan was looking at the tree line. I looked at him, and he looked at the tree line, and neither of us said anything. And I am a person who works in the space of therapeutic silence, and I know what different kinds of quiet feel like, and this one felt like standing in a room after something enormous has moved through it. The air a little different in every direction. That night, I set the camp up for sleep, checked the bear hang, and came back to the fire with both cups. I poured coffee into mine. I poured coffee into Carl's cup and set it on the flat boulder at the fire's edge, in the same position as the night before. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at the stump. "You planning to move it again?" I said, to the tree line and to whatever was beyond it, and to Carl, who would have laughed at me for saying it. "Go ahead." I went to sleep. In the morning, before I opened the tent, I already knew. I sat up in the grey light and listened to Rex breathing, and I knew the cup was not on the rock. I felt it the way you feel a change in a room before you have seen the evidence of it, the particular calibration of something that has been familiar for a long time, telling you that something is different. I stayed with that for a moment, my hands around nothing in the dark of the tent. Then I unzipped the tent and walked out. The flat boulder was empty. Carl's cup was on the stump, upright, the stone from yesterday removed, and a different stone placed inside it, slightly smaller, with a vein of white quartz running through the grey. A river stone again, rounded, deliberate. I stood in front of it for a long time. Long enough that the birds started, the first of the morning chorus, a varied thrush somewhere in the hemlock that I had heard at this camp before and always been glad for. Long enough that the light shifted from grey to a pale gold, the kind of October morning light that the Cascades do for maybe 2 hours before the clouds come back in. Carl and I had been partners for 8 field seasons. He was the person I had spent more hours in the backcountry with than any other person alive or not. He was precise about rocks, actually. He had studied geology as an undergraduate before he came to the Ranger Service, and he had a habit of picking up interesting stones and turning them in his fingers and naming the mineral composition to whoever was near. Not lecturing, just pleased. The way a person is pleased when they know a thing and can name it. He had given me a piece of rose quartz once from a drainage in the southern range, saying it was the kind of thing that took 1,000,000 years to make, and he wanted me to have it. I still had it in a jar on the windowsill of my office, and I had never told anyone where it came from. The stone in the cup had a vein of white quartz in it. I do not know what to do with that as evidence. I have tried to think about it the way a practical person is supposed to think about a thing, which is to say I have tried to determine whether it is a coincidence or something else, and I have never been able to put it cleanly in either category. What I can say is that I was standing in front of that cup with a stone in it, and I felt something unlock in my chest that had been locked for 3 years. Some specific knot of pressure that I had grown so accustomed to that I had started to think it was just how my chest felt, the natural interior architecture of a man who had made a decision about the weather and gone home. I was not crying. I want to be clear that I was not crying. I was standing very still with my hands open at my sides, and the birds were starting up in the hemlock, and the early light was on the stump, and on the cup, and on the stone with the white vein. And I breathed out, slowly, all the way out, the kind of exhale that you do not plan. "Hey!" The voice came from behind me, small and careful, the voice of someone who is not certain they should be speaking at all. I turned around. Dylan stood outside his tent, the sleeping bag gone, his camp jacket on, Rex at his knee. He was looking at the cup on the stump. "Hey," I said back. He was quiet for a moment. Rex pressed against his knee. Dylan looked at the cup, then at me, then back at the cup. When he spoke again, his voice was rough in the way that voices get when they have not been used for a long time, the way a door sounds when the hinge has not been opened in months. "My dad," he said, and then he stopped. Started again. "He used to. In the mornings. He'd make 2 cups. He stopped. He always made 2 cups. One for him and one for I don't know who." He did not finish the sentence. He did not look at me while he said it. He looked at the cup on the stump, and Rex looked up at him. And I looked at this boy who had not spoken voluntarily in 11 weeks, and I could feel the weight of what he had just put down, the particular shift of air around a person who set something heavy on a table. "Yeah," I said. I meant it as an acknowledgement. Not a pivot, not a therapeutic redirect, not the thing a trained person says to invite elaboration. I just said yeah, because it was the only word that fit what he had said, and what it cost him to say it. He nodded. Then he went to the woodpile and started building the morning's fire as if the conversation had not happened, as if he had simply needed to set those words somewhere, and now they were set, and he could move on to the work of the day. I let him. That was the right thing. I have been trained to know when to let a thing breathe and when to go after it, and this was a thing that needed to breathe. I picked up Carl's cup from the stump, carefully, without disturbing the stone. I carried it back to the fire ring and set it on the flat boulder. I did not take the stone out of it. I left the stone where it was, in the cup, on the rock. We spent the last 2 days of the session doing the work I had planned, and some of it went the way sessions go when a client has started to let something move in them, which is to say, it went slowly, and with reversals and with long stretches where nothing seemed to be happening, and then a moment where something clearly was. Dylan spoke 4 or 5 more times across those 2 days, always briefly, always to the point, never in the direction of his father except obliquely, in the way that a person will talk around the thing that matters, because talking directly at it is still too close. I did not push. Pushing was not what this required. On the last morning, packing out, Dylan paused at the stump and looked at it for a moment, the way you look at a place when you are committing it to something, and then he shouldered his pack and started down the trail. I looked at the tree line. I am not going to tell you that I saw anything at the tree line in that moment. I did not see anything that I can describe. What I can tell you is that the hemlock stood the way it had stood the whole session, ancient and patient and not particularly interested in me one way or the other, and that there was a quiet out there that had a particular texture to it, the quality of a presence that has stepped back to let something complete itself. I picked up Carl's cup, The stone was still in it. I turned the cup over in my hands, looked at the white quartz vein in the grey stone, and put it in the side pocket of my pack where I keep the things I want to be able to reach without digging. I took the stone out only when I got home. The office has a windowsill that faces east, which in late October means the early light comes in at a low angle and touches the things on that sill in a particular way. I set the riverstone next to the piece of rose quartz Carl had given me years before in the southern range, and I looked at the two of them for a while, and I thought about what it means to keep an object, not because it proves anything, but because it holds something that otherwise has nowhere to live. I called Dylan's case manager the day after I filed the session report, and I told her that the session had produced a significant verbal disclosure, that Dylan had spoken voluntarily, that the content was paternal estrangement, and that the mode of disclosure suggested he was ready for a different kind of therapeutic support than he had been receiving. She was quiet for a moment when I told her. Then she said, 11 weeks. I said, yes, 11 weeks. She said she would call his counselor and set up a referral. I said good and meant it. I kept all of it out of the clinical notes, by which I mean I kept the cup and the stone and the Treeline and what I had seen in the dusk light out of the clinical notes, because those notes are a legal document, and I am a practical person, and there is no regulatory category for what I would have been writing. I filed the session accurately in every other respect. Dylan had spoken. The presenting behaviour had shifted. The referral was warranted. All of that was true, and I wrote it truly. What I could not write was the other part. I have not written it anywhere until now. Rex is 10 now, grey to his ears, slower on the uphill than he was. He sleeps at my feet in the office when I'm doing paperwork, which is most mornings, and he wakes up when I get the pack out of the closet and comes to stand at the door with his tail moving in that slow, hopeful way he has. He still works the sessions with me. I still take him into the backcountry. I took a different client to that same base camp in the spring, following a man in his 50s who had referred himself after a long period of what he called losing the thread, and I set up the camp the way I always set up the camp. And in the evening, I put the fire ring together and set out the cups. Mine in my hands. Carl's on the flat boulder. The stone with the white quartz was in the cup because I had brought the cup back with the stone in it, and I set it on the rock the way I always set it, and I went to sleep. In the morning, the cup was on the boulder where I had left it. The stone was where I had left it. I do not know what I expected. I think I had not expected anything, or had not let myself. I picked up the cup and drank from Carl's cup instead of mine, which I had never done before, and I do not know exactly why I did it that morning, except that it felt right in the way that very few things had felt right to me in a long time. I have thought about it since, trying to understand the shape of what happened in that camp in October. I have tried to put it in the categories I have. I have tried the rational ones first, the way I always do, and they have failed in the same places they failed at the stump in the early morning light. I have tried the explanatory ones, the ones that involve something with a name and a nature and a reason for being in those hills, and they have failed too, because the truth is, I do not know what walked in those hills, and I'm no longer sure that knowing is what I was offered. What I was offered, as near as I can tell, was a witness. Something that moved in the dark at the edge of old-growth timber and paid enough attention to a tin cup on a flat rock to understand what it meant, and to move it to the threshold between the camp and the trees, and to put a stone inside it, the kind of stone a man who spent his life in the field would know the name of. Something that noticed a private grief in a private place, and reached across the distance that such things require, and did the one specific thing that grief needed done, not the thing that could be explained, but the thing that could be felt. Dylan is doing better. I know this from a follow-up call I made to his case manager 8 months after the session, which is beyond my standard clinical obligation, but not beyond my interest in the people I take into the backcountry. He had started talking to a therapist, the case manager said, in a way that suggested he was actually going to keep going. That was how she said it. He's actually going to keep going. I knew what she meant. There are clients for whom that is genuinely uncertain, and then there are moments when you can hear in someone's voice that the uncertainty has shifted. He had asked about the camp. That is what she told me. He had asked if there were other programs like it, other places that worked the same way. I said I would be glad to take him back if he wanted, and I meant it. And I have not heard anything more which, in this kind of work, you learn to read as its own kind of progress. Because the clients who are doing all right are often the ones who stop needing to call. I still set 2 cups at the evening fire on every session. Some clients notice, and some do not. The 1 or 2 who have asked, I have told them, it is something I do for someone I worked with for a long time, and I let it go there because the longer version is not a thing I can explain in a clinical setting without losing the license I worked hard for, and also because the longer version is not really mine to tell. It belongs to the camp, and to the hemlock, and to whatever walks there when the light is going down. There are 3 cups on my windowsill at home now. The rose quartz from Carl, the riverstone with the white quartz vein, and a piece of smooth, dark basalt I picked up from the trail on my way out of the camp in the spring, on the instinct that I wanted something of that place here, in the morning light, where I could see it when I sit down to work. Rex is asleep at my feet as I tell you this. His breathing is the slow, regular rhythm of a dog with a good conscience, and the morning light is coming in at its low October angle, and the 3 stones are on the sill, and that seems as a way to be in the world, like enough. I have not gone back looking for what moved in those hills. I do not plan to. Whatever it was not waiting to be found. It was waiting to do what it came to do, and then it was gone, and the space it left has a different shape than the space that was there before. I am not a person who believes in things I cannot verify. I want that on the record. But I am also not a person who throws away evidence because it does not fit the category I started with. The cup moved 6 feet. The stone was placed with intention. The boy who had not spoken in 11 weeks said his first words in the morning light, looking at a tin cup on a stump, and what he said was about his father, and what it cost him to say it, you could feel. I checked the distance one more time before we broke camp. 6 feet exactly from the flat boulder to the stump. I measured it with my boot. 3 times. Some things do not need an explanation. They need a witness. Rex twitches in his sleep, chasing something I cannot see, and I let him run.